All of us at some point or another have heard the expression, the power of story. And here on The Perspective, we tell many stories. We share stories of people who've had an encounter that has changed their life. While it wasn't a life-changing encounter for me, it was a memorable story for me this past summer. It was in August, and we were at a camp called Elam Lodge where I was the guest speaker for the week. But there was also another man who was there who was speaking with me. His name was Dave Lombardo. And if anyone can tell a story or get caught up in it, it's Dave. And Dave also has a way of writing his own narrative, of helping people write stories. And what happened is we got near the end of the week, we decided that we would do a baptism, and where people can make a public step of saying that they were a follower of Jesus. Maybe you're watching right now, you never have been baptized, but you're saying, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus. You know, he calls us to do that. Let me paint the picture. It was about 7:30 at night. The skies were gray. The rain had been falling. And one after another, people were stepping forward and saying, I want to make a public stand. I want to say that I'm a follower of Jesus. And then the rain got heavier and heavier, but people were staying there because it was a moment. And while I was calling out the people, there was a young lady that finally, when I said, is there anyone else who wants to be baptized? She came forward. And out of the corner of his eye, Dave saw who that person was, and he interrupted me. And that was fine. And he saw this woman because he had helped her years ago when she was a teenager in his youth group. And he said to her, are you prepared to make the step? Do you want to get baptized? Are you ready to get in the water? And she said, yes. And then he said to her, let's go. Let's get baptized. Let's make that statement. And it was like the 150 people were just taken back with the seriousness of the moment, but the incredible joy when this woman was saying yes to Jesus. And Dave led her into the water, and with others who were there, he baptized her, and she came out to cheers of people who were watching here in the studio today, watching with us and speaking to us right now is Dave Lombardo. And Dave, I just want to welcome you today. That was such a beautiful moment a few weeks ago. And thanks for coming on the program and talking about the stuff that matters most to you. Really glad you're here.
Thanks, Mike. It's so good to be connected with you here today.
And that was a great moment. What was stirring in your heart when that happened, Dave?
You know, there's always a sense of nervousness when you make a call to say who is going to come forward, because you wonder whether or not anybody is going to come forward. But, you know, we're asking people to take a step of faith and be baptized, but it's really a step of faith for the ministers to invite people to step into that as well. And person after person had come forward. I think there were 14 total baptisms that night. And when she came out of the crowd, it was, I just lit up. Like it was like fireworks were going off. She kind of ran over to me. You know, I grabbed her, gave her a hug, and I just knew it was going to be a special moment.
Yeah, and even as I'm reliving it, there is a lot of emotion in my voice, and because it was just powerful to see how God was moving and touching people's lives. And I know what is close to your heart is to see that move of God go across our country. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I've been able to watch God at work in a variety of different ways over, you know, through most of my adult life, whether it be serving in churches, youth ministries, planting some churches. Now I'm serving with Prison Fellowship Canada. And wherever you go, whatever type of people you meet, whether they're, church people who've grown up in church their entire life, whether they're people who are disenfranchised from the church and have walked away, whether they're people who have no religious or spiritual upbringing whatsoever, wherever you meet them, there's something incredible that happens when they start to really lean into the person of Jesus and see that he's not just trying to make a bunch of rules for all of us to follow, but that he's somebody who knows us inside out and still loves us just as we are.
You know, Dave, as you know, you just so eloquently described the calling that God has given to us and how he changes lives. You're in a very interesting position right now where you're in a lot of prisons from maximum down to minimum security. Tell us a little bit about Prison Fellowship International, and then I want you to jump in and talk about a couple stories that are close to your heart, how God has changed even what would appear to be the hardest person, because we often look, don't we, and say, oh, well, you know what, there's no hope for me. But then we say, well, if God could change me, there's hope for you. So I know you got some great stories.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, Prison Fellowship exists to be a restorative and reconciling presence in the life of prisoners, ex-prisoners, their families, and their victims. And everything that we do is based on the life and teachings of Jesus Christ. And so what we have been able to do in Canada over the last 40 or so years is gain access into a number of different institutions, whether they be provincial or federal institutions for men, for women, youth, correctional centers as well. And we do a number of things. The main thing we try to do, though, is build relationships with people, help them understand that they're more than just a number that's plastered on the back of their jumpsuit, that they have a name, that name is important, that God sees them, and that God has something really special in store for them. So we do this by leading Bible studies. We have mentorship programs for individuals when they're released. We work with families and the children of incarcerated parents, sending them off to summer camps. And at Christmas time, we provide gifts. Actually, the parent who's incarcerated can give us a wish list for their children. And then we have volunteers across the country that go and deliver those gifts on behalf of the parent. Last year, we did over 3,600 gifts across the country.
Wow.
At Christmas time. And it's all about restoration. It's all about, here's where we're at, and what is God doing to bring us back to the person we're actually meant to be? How is he instilling wholeness in our life, healing us physically, spiritually, mentally? And honestly, I look at it and say, this is the work of God to bring us all into this place of true shalom, right? Where everything is the way it's meant to be, where there is peace. I'll tell you one story about a man that we were journeying with. He was in a maximum security remand, and so he was awaiting his sentencing. He was going to find out whether or not he'd be shipped off to federal and serve 2 years or more later on. And we were just working through a Bible study on the Gospel of John, and throughout about 6 or 7 weeks into the program, he started to say, I don't know what's happening here, but for some reason, when I pray, he had a Buddhist background. He said, when I pray my Buddhist prayers and meditation, and I come out of my cell, I still want to knock people out. I still want to be violent. I'm still full of anger. I'm still full of depression. I'm still full of all these things. But when I pray in Jesus' name, something happens to me. Can you explain what's happening to me? Like when I pray a prayer in Jesus' name, all of a sudden I start to feel peace. I start to feel kindness. I start to feel understanding. My anxiousness goes away. Can you explain to me what's happening there? I said, yeah, I can explain to you what's happening there. What's happening is the Spirit of God is doing a work in your life. What's happening is he's actually taking away the old person and he's imparting a new person within you. And that's the evidence. I mean, that's the story. I don't have to, I continued to walk with him, of course, but I didn't have to convince him that the power of God was real. The man was experiencing it for himself. And there are many stories that we hear time and time again. One other thing that's really significant that we see is men and women and young people, when they meet God, they have a change in perspective on what's taken place in their life. And so we had another fellow that I was working with. We work with men and women and young people. I primarily work with men in my setting in Toronto. But we had another man, and he basically came to the conclusion where he says, I know I'm guilty. And I've been fighting and pushing, and I've had all of these justifications, and I've tried to rationalize everything, how this is everything that has been done to me, but I know it's my own doing. And that's significant, because when you're put into a situation where you do commit a crime, it's not uncommon for multiple charges to be stacked on top of one another. Sometimes you're being charged for things you didn't actually do. And there is a real sense of injustice there. But for individuals to come to a point where they can say, if God is seeing me and he still loves me and understands me and wants to walk with me, it doesn't matter how the rest of the world is viewing me. I'm going to trust in him and take this step forward. So we see stories like this happening over and over again across our country.
That is so encouraging to hear. And Dave, as you talk about helping people to walk with Jesus, we're going to come back in just a moment with you to unpack what discipleship looks like. Because one of the ways that Jesus tells stories throughout the scriptures, he takes people and says, come follow me, walk with me. And I think of the disciples and the amazing stories that they experienced, you know, that they could share afterwards and that we have a record of. But God is writing stories still today in the lives of people. We're going to be back in just a moment with Dave Lombardo. And if at any time you would like someone to pray with you or talk with you, call our toll-free number at 855-910-6297. I'll be right back. And we're back here on The Perspective with Dave Lombardo, who has pastored in several locations over the years, but also is currently working as the regional manager for Prison Fellowship Canada. And Dave, talk to us about how people can get involved in prison ministry, because many people are helping you.
Yeah, absolutely. We have thousands of volunteers actually across the country doing a wide variety of things. Oftentimes, when people think of prison ministry, they think specifically about going into prisons or jails to run programs. However, there's a much broader umbrella of things that we do, including we have phone lines, we've got mentorship where you can walk with individuals after they've been released. We've got the Angel Tree Christmas program that I referred to earlier with regards to coordinating and purchasing and then delivering gifts on behalf of incarcerated parents to their children. And if you want to get involved, the best place to start is on our website, prisonfellowship.ca. Again, that's prisonfellowship.ca. And just spend a few minutes going through there. We've got some videos, some stories in there that'll kind of let you know more about what we do and how we do it, but also why we do it. And I'll tell you this, I've been going into Toronto South Detention Center for a little over a year to lead Bible study programs in there with a group of men. And I want to tell you that my partner that I go in with is 78 years old. And the men that we minister to respect him so highly. They look at him as an uncle or even a grandfather in some cases. That's how I've begun to look at him. And so there's no age limit really in terms, well, there is an age limit on the bottom end. In order to go in, you got to be at least 25 years old or up. But on the other end, on the higher end, there's no limit. It's about where your heart is at in wanting to care for those that are impacted by people, work with people who are justice involved.
Oh, that is so cool to hear. So you're saying there's hope for me. I mean, when I retire, there might be a job for me.
Absolutely. Just give me a shout.
Dave, I want to talk about something that I know is close to your heart. You're doing it with Prison Fellowship International, but it's just been a way of life. Following Jesus is more than just saying a prayer. He calls us to be disciples, to be followers of him. I want you to unpack that for us and talk to us about what are some practical things that we can do to follow Christ? Yeah,
it's a great question. And it is something that is near and dear to my heart. I mean, it's implicit with the statement, follower of Jesus. The question we ought to be asking is, well, if we're followers of Jesus, then Jesus, where are you going? And how do I follow you when you go there, as you go there? If it's just a decision to believe Jesus, well, that's something that we can do in a moment. And it's kind of right here, right there. But following implies actually movement. Following implies going after Jesus and seeing the way that he's leading us on. You know, my family just got a puppy, and that puppy is all up in our business, following us around all the time. I kick her halfway across the floor, not on purpose, but because she gets caught up in my feet because she's so excited to follow me wherever I go throughout the house. And I think discipleship is a similar kind of thing. I mean, Jesus doesn't really kick us around intentionally or unintentionally, but there's this idea of being excited about what Jesus is up to and wanting to follow him around. And so I think for most people, the reason discipleship is a challenge in terms of being someone who might disciple somebody else. I think part of that challenge is because we haven't necessarily been discipled ourselves or led ourselves. And so first and foremost, for the follower of Jesus, we look at Jesus himself and we say, well, how do I follow him? We look into our Bibles. We read about the life and times of Jesus. We read about the things that he was up to. And we then begin to recognize that we find ourselves in similar situations that Jesus did all the time, right? Jesus was walking around and he began interacting with sick people, or people who were stricken with poverty, or people who were religiously confused, or people who were social outcasts. As we follow Jesus, we actually will have eyes to see that we're finding ourselves in these kind of circumstances all the time. And it seems like there's this call within churches that we need to be making disciples. We ought to be making disciples. But in order to make disciples, we first and foremost have to be a disciple of the one true King, Jesus himself, and see where he's going. That way it influences us. And then we get to invite people along on the journey with us. And I think that involves just looking at people who are a little bit younger than us, and, not necessarily younger than us in age, but younger than us perhaps in spiritual age or Christian age in terms of the length of time they've been following Jesus, and inviting them, just like Jesus invited us to come follow him. We invite people to come follow us. We invite them to come with us into church. We invite them to coffees. We invite them to lunch. For me, there was a man named Gary who took me under his wing and invited me to, we had coffee and Thai food every single week for years. And it was so much more than just hanging out. It was a safe space for me to explore Christian faith, a safe space for me to ask all the questions that I didn't necessarily feel safe asking in other places, a place for me to express my doubts. And Gary was just there to love me and to point me towards Jesus over and over again. And so I think there's just so much that is attainable. It's not as complicated as we make it. We can actually do this.
So when you describe that scenario, you're thinking, I'd like a friend like that who would take me for Thai food every week. Just bottom line.
Yeah.
How can the church do a better job of this? And is it our North American culture? We got about 2 minutes left. So
there's a whole lot that could be said about North American culture and this kind of thing. And I don't know all of the ins and outs of what the church has done right and wrong. But what I do believe churches ought to be doing is casting a vision for what a life that follows Jesus actually looks like. It doesn't simply look like making sure you're in a pew on Sunday morning or giving a certain amount of money. Following Jesus is a day by day, in and out, all around, ups and downs kind of a thing. And so churches, I believe, need to be creating spaces where people can walk with other people together through the variety of experiences that life throws at them. And I have a heart for young people in particular. So I would say if you're a little bit older, you ought to be looking out for people that are a little bit younger and inviting them to follow you, so that way you can disciple them and mentor them in the ways of the Lord.
Quick question. What's the difference between discipleship and leadership?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think discipleship is specifically focused on helping others follow in the way of Jesus. Leadership can be broadly applied. When we're talking about Christian discipleship, we're talking about something more specific here about let's look at Jesus, let's follow Jesus, let's be like Jesus as Jesus works through us.
Love that. We're going to wrap it up, and I know you love stories. I'm putting you on the spot right now. Give me one of your best stories, your favorite stories of someone who was lost and then they were found by Jesus. Yeah.
Well, I would tell you my own story because I do love that story, but I'll tell you about a man named is a man who was a drug addict, is a man who was involved in crime, was a man who was removed from his family as a result of a lot of life choices he had made. And over the course of months of just walking with him and slowly nudging him in the direction of Jesus, he got to a point where he said, hey, I feel like unless I accept Jesus, nothing is really going to change in my life. And I said, well, you've actually just said one of the most profound things that you're ever going to say in your life. And that day, Jesus did accept Jesus, and he is still incarcerated, but his whole perspective on life has changed because he knows that even though he's still in jail, even though he's still in jail, he's free. Wow. And that's an interesting thing to actually think about. Is there freedom when you're still incarcerated? Yeah, in Jesus' name, there is.
Love that story. Dave, we're going to have to close for now. I want you to come back and tell more stories because stories influence, they shape us. And I just want to encourage all of our viewers right now that God is writing a story in your life. Just as Dave has described some of these amazing things, He wants to do the amazing thing in your life as well. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.
What does it mean to redeem? It means to take something bad and make it things that were meant for evil. God turned it around for my good.
Today we come to the passage of Scripture in the book of Ruth, and as we're going through the journey, it's one of the most interesting passages I find in the Bible, almost humorous as well, as we see a custom that certainly we're not familiar with in our day and age. It's a custom where we're going to be introduced to God's provision for people who socially are not able to provide for themselves, who economically are distraught. And in this situation, if somebody's husband had died, the next of kin could marry her. And in marrying the woman, he would take all the responsibilities and liabilities for that woman. And in the story, as we unpack it, Ruth and Naomi think that their next of kin is this amazing man, Boaz, who seems to have been airdropped into their lives. Just as God often does that at the last moment, we see his provision. But there's going to be a glitch in the story, almost like the Hallmark stories, where suddenly just before the end of the show, is the real suitor going to come through and marry the woman? Or is it going to be someone else? Or will there be some kind of crisis that keeps them from doing that? Let's read the passage together, and between today and tomorrow, we're going to get the full rendition of the story. But Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her in Ruth 3, chapter 1, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, and whose young women you were with? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself," and here it is, "and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But don't make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. And then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. Now that's a strange custom, and my wife has reminded me that she will never lay down at my feet, and we joke about that, of course. But we're encountering a strange custom where a woman, a widow, could go and lie at the feet of her closest male relative as a sign of willingness for him to take her in as his wife and raise up children on behalf of the dead relative. Now, the obvious reality is that if the woman, this puts the woman in a precarious position where she could be taken advantage of by the man, or because she might be desperate for social security, she might be tempted to seduce her closest relative. And Ruth finds herself in this position, but chooses not to compromise her integrity, even in the middle of the night. You see, integrity is an interesting subject that impacts our behavior in the bedroom and the boardroom, and even on the soccer pitch with our Canadian Olympians. Integrity is not something you drum up when the need arises. It is a state of being. Integrity implies wholeness and honesty and uprightness. Integrity always calls out in the midst of life's daily journey, whether you're wealthy or whether you're poor like Ruth was. Consider the following thoughts and scriptures that help us deal with integrity. Integrity becomes a reflection of who I allow to influence me. It says in Acts chapter 4, when they saw the courage of Peter and John, they took note that these men had been with Jesus. And integrity also becomes a rationale for how I choose to handle life's issues. Joshua said, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And integrity, as part of our discipleship program, becomes a regulating valve for how I walk and talk. Because James tells us if anyone is never at fault in what he says, he is a perfect man, able to keep his whole body in check. And so that's why we need to ponder this and pray and say, Lord, search me and know me, and see if there is any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. We'll be right back.
And I had a person tell me when I was 11 years old, it was a little morbid at the time, but I didn't really figure it out until I was a little older, but he said, grab a piece of paper and write down what you would want on your headstones. What do you want to be remembered as? And write that out. And then think about how you can spend more days living as that person. That will give you the clarity. And then with the clarity, then you build in steps of what you need to do each day to become that person. And then you determine how you want to impact culture or those around you. How do I live as that person to have that impact? And then what do you want to leave behind? Maybe it's the people, maybe it's a foundation. What do you want to leave behind? Because this is not a dress rehearsal. This life will kill you. We're all in. And at the same time, there's beauty in that. How do we recognize that and structure our lives knowing that we have a limited amount of time and we can't afford to waste it?
I might be biased, but one of the reasons I've enjoyed the program today is the reminder of the stories that God is writing in all of our lives. We see that in the story of Ruth and Naomi. I think of the lady that was baptized by Dave Lombardo. I think of the other stories that he told about prisoners who seem to be so far away and having no hope, and discovering that Jesus does love them. And here in the perspective, we want to tell the story of how God can change lives. And by sharing stories like we have today, we're able to impact literally thousands of people across the country. If you've never supported our ministry, I would like to invite you to become a partner with me. You can go to our website, theperspective.tv, and there's a donate button. But also we want to give you a gift. I want to send you this month's Bible study guide to help you become a follower of Jesus, to grow deeper. And as you send us your mailing address, we will send you each month a copy of the scriptures to help you. I teach on it during the television program, and you can track along in your own booklet. I love having a book in my hand. I like things online, obviously, but a book in my hand, man, I can go back to it and I can turn to it. We're here to help you to discover the power of Jesus in your life. Remember this, you are loved by him. You can never get too far from the love of God. And at any time, call us or write to us, prayer@theperspective.tv.